Welcome back, everybody, to the Sexy Business Podcast. We've been thrown in jail, or at least that's what Mastercard and Visa want to do to people like us. Once again, I am Spooky Dangerous, and joined with me, as always, is Lewd Neko. Say hello.
I'm a jail kitty today.
And unfortunately, once again, we have to come and talk about dire news. Look, what we really want to be doing on the show is talking about stuff we love to goon to, but it's under attack. And if you are a Twitter user, you would have seen thousands of posts about discourse about this. My entire Blue Sky feed at the moment is still calls to action trying to solve this problem, where basically payment processors have discontinued access or threatened to discontinue access to a lot of different storefronts under threat of their reputation being tarnished for being associated with them unless adult content that doesn't, air quote, meet their guidelines is removed. Now, I'm going to put a link in the description to a video essayist that I really like called Lextorius, who went through and talked about a lot of the historical precedents set, a lot of the legal articles, and a lot of much more specific detail about the overall situation. But what we want to more focus on here is first-hand impacts, things that we have directly interacted with and seen and how we've been affected. Because THM has taken a hit, no shock. And we kind of want to run through some of the stuff, and then we'll close with like what things you can be doing to be helping us. But what do you think is a good kicking off point here, Neko?
I mean, I guess we should start by talking about Collective Shout, who is kind of like the instigator to an extent. I'll start by saying PayPal, Mastercard, and Visa have always sucked. This has been an issue that sex workers have been dealing with since, cam sites became a thing. For those of you unaware, there are already a lot of restrictions on what kind of porn you're allowed to access. So, for example, if you've ever gone on Pornhub and you tried to use a certain term and you got no results, that was because it's one of Mastercard or Visa's illegal terms, which can include anything from hypnosis is a really common banned term, for example, because it's seen as like quote unquote non-consensual, or even just the word force, no matter how it's used in context, because it implies something non-consensual, is again also banned. Hell, Pornhub even has like a kind of ridiculous, I think it's probably some sort of AI scan through that goes through each videos. I know someone who had a video get taken down because they said the word baby, as in oh baby, like that. And it just detected the word baby and was like, oh, this is underage, and then immediately just taked it down. So this is something that's been happening for a really long time. And of course, NSFW games have also been dealing with it, but to a lesser extent for a while, because of the nature of it being like fictional content, it could sort of get under all of those rules because, it's just art. A lot of this is a lot more niche. So it also just wasn't really being flagged as much as opposed to anything involving actual people. But recently, Collective Shout, which is a quote unquote like feminist organization, though I use that in a very dirty, like more like a turf kind of feminist way.
Also a charity specifically.
Yeah, and it's kind of exactly what you expect. They sort of claim like, oh, we're just trying to protect women and children. It's very much like what the kind of fundamentalist Christians do anytime they try to ban something, is they always hide behind, we're just protecting the family, we're protecting children. When in fact it is, of course, just censorship. And I mean, if you look on their website, there's like pictures of children, and it's like, oh, well, don't you want to defend them and from the evil child sexual abuse themed games? And they made a sort of letter that was calling out all of these CEOs for profiting off of rape, incest, and CSA. Particularly, they targeted No Mercy as like their ignition point. We talked about No Mercy like a month or two ago, and apparently this was the game that was like the final straw for them, and they decided to go on Steam and they found games that were so distressing they can't even describe them.
No Mercy isn't even good.
But after this, they basically said that these companies are profiting off of, child porn and incest, and that if they didn't take down this content, they were being like socially irresponsible and all of this other stuff. And they responded, kind of. Steam and Itch.io had this sort of unified response of suddenly changing a lot of their NSFW rules basically overnight.
Yeah, which has been really rough. I do want to add one thing where I believe Collective Shout has done more damage to Australia's reputation as a bunch of laid back people, more than literally any other propaganda movement could, which hurts my soul, first of all. But yeah, basically, Steam and itch.io were like, okay, we just have to delist everything. That's our easiest immediate reaction so that we can continue to make money. And a lot of these problems are basically, it gets levied at somebody and they go, well, I can't stop making all of this money, therefore I must immediately obey your demands. And so every time Mastercard gets something levied at them, they're like, we don't want to be interested in any kind of legal action because that costs us money, and we don't want to have any brand reputation tarnished. That costs us money. But what we're actually seeing now is that both Visa and Mastercard stocks are plummeting because the revenge of the average Gooner has been like, no, actually, we don't want our free speech censored. And it really is kind of a stepping point. Like, a lot of people have posted a lot of stuff talking about the greater ramifications of things. I have two favorites that I see posted a lot on Blue Sky, which is Rose Valerian, a comic artist, and 30 Helens, who some of you might recognize as a Fuda comic artist. And basically, they're like, look, the fight against sex workers is nothing new or exciting, but the ramifications of this go far beyond removing a mid-tier Gooner game on Steam, because as soon as they start to gain ground with these kind of things, and we've actually seen people like fucking Yoko Taro of Nier Automata fame clap back and be like, why does this random corporation have the ability to censor what we in Japan can see on the internet? And it's giving these corporations gigantic power to affect the entire world beyond any, country's law system because of whatever their beliefs are, whatever their brand risk is. And I've been saying from the very beginning, we've been seeing a lot of anti-trans rhetoric in the States for a very long time now, where in some places it's still legal to just kill these people. And what's to say that that's going to be the next step? Our content is incredibly trans-focused and trans-positive. What's to say next that is the next banned term or, taboo category, and then all of a sudden that is just banned from the entire internet? And when these kinds of people can't find these safe spaces to be themselves, it's so much easier to be othered. It's so easy to see a suicide rate greatly climb and all the protections from these people fall apart. And the other biggest, scariest thing that I'm currently struggling to sleep at night about because of, if places like this in the internet start to be painted white and you can't see anything and no one can talk to each other, these are the greatest places where people organize to protest. People organize to fight back against these kinds of things. And if people aren't able to communicate with each other, it's very hard to fight this kind of tyrannical regime that we are seeing grow right now. And that's why people are posting all these call to actions constantly about ringing up the Mastercard or Visa customer service lines, jamming the lines, registering your complaints, so they are forced to cripple to pressure of the actual collective's actual shout instead of one small group's loud complaint.
And I think if you need an example of like this will ultimately affect like even just the average person who doesn't even care about porn, a lot of the discourse reminds me a lot of the current issues with libraries in the United States. So there's been a lot of discourse around libraries, like basically for like, it feels like a really long time, but at least like 5 to 7 years, maybe even a decade, where, there was all of these sorts of like, again, like these quote unquote like family organizations who were claiming that libraries in particular, public school libraries, were giving actual child porn and harmful material to students. And 99% of the time, the child porn was just a book that had LGBT content, or a young adult novel that talked about things like sexual abuse or mental health issues, suicide, self-harm, issues that teenagers deal with, and they need that kind of literature to understand their world and to understand things they might be experiencing. But, under their sort of guidelines, anything that has to do with sex, should only be for people who are 18 and up, even if it's not graphic in any way, shape, or form. Like, I think a really good example is one book that was claimed to be, pornographic, was a comic adaptation of The Diary of Anne Frank. And the reason why it was claimed to be pornographic is because there was like one fantasy sequence where it shows a Greek statue, and the Greek statue was naked, and you could see like a boob. And this was the entire reason why they thought this book should be banned. And they were literally threatening to arrest librarians, to like claim that they were like child groomers and that they should be, charged and sent to jail. And while we might not be at that point with, game developers, if it continues in that direction, then eventually that's what it leads to is, oh, you're making this game, you're selling this content, you are basically literally a rapist, so you should just go to jail for having artistic ideas.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I know I've mentioned before on this podcast, but if you are watching this video, you are the person that they are targeting, and not specifically because you have an interest in adult content. I know that that is our market, but I know for a fact that there is no person in a protected class that would be watching this. No billionaires subscribe to our YouTube channel. So you, the average person, and me and every person that I could ever meet in my casual life are all people that are going to be threatened by having this, free speech kind of trampled. One of the more ridiculous ones that I noticed was menstruation is a banned word in the list of terms that are not supposed to show up in things. And so what kind of things does that remove? Is this inherently a sexual thing that happens? If anything, that's just trying to trample on stuff like sexual education, a thing that America is already heavily scrutinized for being very poor about. And when you remove a lot of these kinds of resources and ability for young people to learn about the world, it is a much easier way to, put control on them. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is that education is a tool for the oppressed, but censorship is a tool for the oppressor. If the oppressor ever wants something to not happen or to solve a problem, they can use censorship to make it go away. But if they actually wanted to solve a problem, they can use education to help people to be able to navigate these issues better. If Collective Shout actually cared about protecting women and families, they can use education to do this kind of thing. They can use therapy to do this kind of thing. If they really wanted to help at-risk women, they would have been contributing to things like women's shelters, or they would have been putting money into place to train people to help to be able to deal with these at-risk people. Last time I checked, they just whinge about things on the internet. And it doesn't actually solve any problems. It actually always harms people. And again, this is a lot of stuff that we've just kind of seen witnessed and people talking about and seeing a lot of other people suffer. But I did kind of want to talk about the first-hand impact of what it is actually happening to THM Studios, because I did do a big Patreon post on this, yesterday at time of recording. But I do really want to exaggerate on this, where as a business, because that's what we are, right? The main way that we function is that we hire high quality artists, and a lot of studios and a lot of businesses that do this kind of thing greatly underpay artists or find the cheapest people to do whatever the work it is that they've done. And if you ask Blackout, if you ask Miggy, I've literally never negotiated on how much money they want to be paid. Blackout has a formula for every single thing, which is like, okay, this is one character half bust, this is two characters full body, it will be this much. Both of them have said multiple times, look, I have to raise my prices because of the way things are, and I've said yes every single time. I've been like, no worries, we will make it happen. I'm always going to make sure that you have a steady job with us for as long as we can keep these projects running. And when stuff like this happens, and I can't confidently say that I can keep these projects running, not only am I really stressed, but I'm worried about trying to keep these people who I've promised employment, that continual funding, that continual income that they now rely on. And makes things really, really stressful when stuff like the itch.io delisting, and I look at my analytics and it goes from a nice big number to 0, basically over the span of a week. We released the Sleeve Shock update. So again, yesterday, time of recording, that's what prompted me talking about this. And what normally happens is every week on the Monday, we get a nice spike of people coming back and downloading the game that own already, and also new people seeing the thing, because the devlog comes out, there's a bit of marketing that goes around it, they'll see the tweet, they'll come and have a look at it. But there was nothing. It's almost as if delisted is deleted. There was basically no traffic. We have 2,000 people that follow the itch.io account. I'm assuming none of them got a notification about the update. The game basically ceases to exist. Steam feels much the same, but it's a lot slower to be able to tell what's going on with Steam. And so Patreon is the only place now, realistically, where you can actually hear about what we're doing. And it wasn't that long ago that Patreon was here also trying to take people down. We've been banned from Patreon before, although I probably will admit that was my fault. We had titties in the thumbnail. But like, this was not a thing that was actively communicated to us. Anything that does happen in the future is going to be taking us down first and explaining it later. And any cut to our income makes it very difficult for us to be able to produce the content that we do. And and like I mentioned in the post, we're reaching far beyond our ability. We've been running at a loss almost since inception, because the idea was to focus on growth, focus on, improving the stuff that we can do, improving our skills, hiring more artists. We've picked up an animator in the last year so that we can go from fully non-animated to having some fully animated projects. We are running 4 games consecutively with an update every single week, and we have never missed an update since doing that. Which is insane, because if you think about your personal life as a person who works, think how many sick days you've had. I worked in a factory and I had more than 21 days off in a month because they put me in hospital. But imagine going through all of this stuff and still I've never missed an update. Our team has always delivered excellence. But somehow, because of problems beyond our control, we now have to suffer and figure out harder and more difficult ways to try and make things come together, because we don't even have any fucking banned terms in our games. I went through and scrubbed through everything. I went through the entire script of Shackles of Elswyn, and we had the word furry show up one time. Yes, we have a werewolf character. No, it didn't refer to her. We had a rug on the floor. I have since changed that text, and you may have noticed it when that update came out. But as far as I can tell, just because we are in the adult category, we have been stifled. And unfortunately, that's been very detrimental so far. And I'm really hoping that the voice of the people will come back and help us take some of these steps and help us, fight and get some of this ground back. And again, I have said before, when we talk about some of these political issues, their strategy is always make things worse faster than you can make things better, which means that you have to be very scared always of what the next worst step is going to be, because it will be faster than you can catch back to what they had just broken.
And I will say, as far as communities coming together and other things you can do, supporting your favorite devs is really important right now. So, if your favorite game or game dev got taken off of itch.io or delisted, or, basically everyone's been struggling, find their Patreon, find their Subscribe Star, find where they're trying to post content, even if it's just their Discord server. I know some devs right now are kind of scrambling to figure out what to do, especially in the case of itch.io. For those of you who purchased games on itch.io that got taken down, so games that didn't just get de-indexed but were deemed, bannable, like this is not allowed to be sold here. Sorry, you no longer have access to that game. You cannot download it anymore. I hope you download it as much as you can. Here's your, warning at this point. I would go into your itch.io and make sure you have everything downloaded and backed up, because anything that gets taken down, it cannot be re-downloaded. You don't even own it anymore. At the very least, with Steam, the few times they have taken down stuff, and I think they've taken down comparatively less compared to itch.io, you still do own it. It still is in your Steam account. But as far as I know, I won't be buying games from itch.io basically anymore unless I absolutely have to, because frankly, this has just completely ruined my trust in them as a platform if they can just decide I'm not legally allowed to own a game I paid for anymore. And I will say for creators, Patreon, again, is kind of a gamble. For most people, it's fine. But if you are creating a game that has more, concerning content, you might get banned there too. Subscribestar is still currently a pretty viable alternative. They are very similar to Patreon, but they currently have like very, very few restrictions on content. I've known some pretty hardcore kinksters who are releasing some pretty intense stuff on there. So I would highly encourage creators to make a Subscribestar, even if you think your game is safe. Like, oh, I make vanilla, heterosexual, staring into each other's eyes and saying we're both adults and we consent and we love to have sex. Like, you could still be next. So I would highly suggest at least having an account ready to go. So if the other shoe drops, because frankly, I've always had it in the back of my head that one of these days Patreon's just going to be like, you know what? No more NSFW content. You should have a backup plan. And this is something a lot of sex workers have to do too, where, if you're working basically in any form of sex industry, you cannot put all of your eggs in one basket because websites get taken down. They change their legislation all the time. It's only going to keep changing as the current political situation gets worse, frankly, over the next couple of years. I don't expect it to get better anytime soon, unfortunately, at least not in the States. So it's time to diversify. So think of other ways that you can make money, be connecting with other creators, create community spaces. So it's really important to have a Discord or to at least have a Blue Sky or something like that where you can at least post updates about your content. And I will say, I think another thing we should be doing is really emphasizing the fact that this will impact everyone. Right now, it's really just a lot of gamers who are primarily, throwing a fit about it. But, if you have friends who are into things like fan fiction, spicy book talk, or, really anything that's like vaguely erotic, like even just TV shows that are kind of a little explicit, talk to them about this kind of stuff. I know it's embarrassing to admit that you enjoy pornography or adult content, but especially if you have more like activist kind of friends or more liberally minded friends, inform them that this shit is happening and that right now it's just hentai and games and things people can kind of scoff at and go, that's silly. But next up, it will be fan fiction. It'll be Archive of Our Own. It will be your favorite spicy book because it contained a kink they didn't like. It'll be, even like movies that are just having erotic content in them. And I think really bringing all of these, disparate communities together is an important thing. Similarly, I think it's about time gamers stop being so hostile to sex workers. I think I saw a lot of hostility in some of these comment sections about like sex work and OnlyFans, but really we're a lot more connected. We're all dealing with the exact same bullshit. These kinds of rules that Visa, Mastercard, PayPal, and other payment processors are doing affect all of us. And, they're even going to affect mainstream websites. So even just going on Twitter or going on YouTube even now with their new ID verification system, I think this is going to pretty quickly impact the mainstream. And that's kind of my saving grace for why I think there's still hope, is that I think it's going to affect the average Joe. And I think then things will start to change.
Yeah, because imagine how many top-end products this is going to affect. I'm thinking Cyberpunk 2077. I'm thinking Baldur's Gate 3. I'm thinking Game of Thrones. There's a lot of HBO-type content, and a lot of series are moving more in that HBO direction where we have to be shocking to the audience. It has to be incredibly graphic. It has to be incredibly sexual to, hit this new market. Like The Boys, for example, which had the man with the unfathomably long dick, which was like a long and running gag. Or they had the guy that shrunk down into size so that he could crawl up this one guy's urethra. This is just a regular TV show that people enjoy in the cape shit category. What's to say that that's not next after all of this? What's to say something more sanitized is next after that? One of the other things that I did want to bring up is that in the Lex Torius video, he talks about a legal precedent called redlining. Now, this calls back to a very, very long time ago, where basically banks would have a map of their local area of who they would be servicing, who their customers would be. And what they would do is they would take a red marker and they would just cross out whole suburbs. And you could probably guess what some of them would be and what kind of demographics it would be. Ready? Say it with me. Black people. Oh, you're probably not shocked. Now, this was actually ruled to be illegal many years ago, like 50 years ago, where a bank could not deny access to people based on a category that they inhabit. And there is currently a bill trying to go through at the moment where it could have a potential side effect where people like payment processors, people like banks would not be able to deny funding, deny financial services to people based on any kind of a category. But the purpose of the bill is to increase stuff like fracking and more hostile oil drilling in different places that have currently been blocked by people with common sense. So it is really hard and complicated to see a path forward where we do actually have some kind of success. But I believe that the legal precedent is there that's on our side. And I do believe that the only way that this kind of thing can get through is via protest, via people actually taking action that does cause detriment to these kind of companies. Stuff like their stock plummeting is a good sign that, look, it's capitalism, right? The goal is to make as much fucking money as possible so you can set the world on fire and say, I was the guy that bought the $1 billion match. And if that's the goal, then you do the thing that makes the money. You don't do the thing that loses your company all the money and has this huge negative PR scenario. And so the more we pressure them, the more we make them out to be the villain, the harder it is for them to recover and for them to backpedal and save face and engage in these fascism and engaging practices that help, the governments secure power over the average person. There was one other thing that I did want to mention is there was this big hubbub maybe a month or two ago about owning games and whether or not platforms like Sony could just go, nah, we don't service this anymore. You don't own this anymore. It's gone forever now. And so games preservation has been a thing that people have been talking about recently because it's not considered art, air quotes, by a lot of different people. And so therefore there is not very many actual preservation put into place. And so it is really easy for games to become lost media. Games no longer supported by the developers, especially if it's a live service game, can just kind of vanish into the ether. Games that require a server for people to play online, if the company is unable to continue paying the server costs or they don't think it's a worthwhile investment, it can vanish forever. And so we have seen a lot of protests lately where, I think it's Stop Killing Games is what it's called, where people are trying to put in these preservation effects. But why is that crowd not here right now when stuff is being taken away from you, hand over fist? However, good old game, GOG, recently came out with an incredibly based tweet saying, hey, we're doing a thing. It's called freedomtobuy.games. And they put up basically a free listing of, it was about 20-ish titles, which was like, if you had ever just scrolled the adult section on Steam, you would have seen these titles. I scrolled through and I recognized all of them. And it was basically like, you can just have these games for free. This is in the interest of keeping this kind of content alive. And 1 million people engaged in this action. Now, GOG has a much more, air quote, normie audience. It wasn't like directly serving horny people and they were like, yes, I've been waiting all of this time for this. Give me all of that. It was regular people that were like, it's free. I will try it out. Yes, I agree with the philosophy of what they are trying to accomplish. And all of those things basically count as votes to saying, yes, we want these things to continue to exist. And it is hard to continue to keep things like this alive, but it is very important for people to be able to own the games that they have bought, keep them and actually hold on to them. For people to be able to archive and preserve games, not just horny games, but games in general. And sometimes horny games are the ones that have that really strong messaging or that, unique experience and story that no other game was brave enough to do. We had fucking Malrui on last week, and he says some of the most profound shit just ever from an adult dev. And my favorite part of it really was do you actually really enjoy killing people in real life? Is that a thing that you think you would have fun doing? Do you actually enjoy having sex? I think that is really fun and people do all the fucking time because it's so good. Why is every single video game that is about killing people all of the time allowed and good? Why are they banning and trying to hide sex games? This is from the guy that made the puzzle game about shoving dildos inside you, that had a random segment about hugging a friend to comfort them after they had just talked about being sexually assaulted. And
yeah,
that's like really strong and a story that should be told, and we might never have heard if stuff like this had gone ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the other thing is like, according to how these, their banned terms and what's not allowed to be depicted, this also impacts like actual survivors of sexual violence. As Mallory mentioned in the review, that story was inspired by someone's real life experience. And a lot of people use their games to talk about these sorts of things where it can be really hard to talk about an experience with, sexual violence, abuse, or any of those other sorts of horrible things. But expressing it through a character or a storyline can be really comforting, not just to the person who's trying to process that, but lots of other people read those stories and they see themselves. There are people who even, recontextualize scenarios in their life and are like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that counted as assault. I didn't realize that what was happening to me in the past was wrong. And those kinds of stories are so important, especially, as we mentioned with education, when people don't have knowledge about how consent works, much less how sex works, people get hurt. That's how children get abused, is they have no context of how their bodies work, of how consent works. They've never been taught that because they were told it was, evil and bad. And then unfortunately, horrible adults are able to use that lack of knowledge and that naivete to take advantage of people. So being able to share these stories, it's not just about the silly porn games like Honey Pop. Well, I still absolutely support silly porn games like Honey Pop. This is also just going to impact, people who are actually trying to share feminist messages, and this is why it's such like a, absolute farce that Collective Shout is claiming to protect women and children, when in fact they are just censoring people who are trying to have real discussions about sex, a topic that affects literally every single person on the planet.
Yeah, it is unfortunately a bit rough. It is one of those, scary flags for fascism that we've been talking about. Like episode 3 or something of the fucking Sexy Business podcast was like, things are bad. I mean, it sucks. We just want to have a things are fun show. We just want to go, hey, look, here is
Next
a cool
episode.
game. Here is a cool fucking developer. Here is a cool project. We have done something exciting and want to show you. And instead, we have to be upset and we have to be angry and we have to tell you about it. I'm upset because I have to be upset and angry and tell you about it. But I do want to talk specifically about the ban list, the words, the naughty words, some of which are like really obvious. And look, a lot of them I'm okay with. Stuff like lolicon and shotacon, I personally dislike how common it is in Japanese media. Because it does very much feel like kids doing stuff they shouldn't be doing. But also, like, me personally, I did have sexual experiences when I was pretty young, but like not in like a negative way, but like it was just a thing I was aware of when I was quite young. So I do understand having stories that, allow these kinds of people to deal with this kind of stuff, but sometimes it can be a little bit suspect. And a lot of the list, it feels like, yeah, cool, it's hard to argue with this thing in particular, but a lot of it is stuff that like requires context. One of the words is poop. Like, it has to be put in such a specific context for it to be a sexual thing and therefore be on the no-no list. It's like, imagine if you were trying not to use a swear word and you didn't want to say shit. And so you said poop instead, and now you are banned when you were trying to use a more, demure version of the language. Which
Also,
is kind of crazy.
yeah, like scat is icky and it's a very common hard limit for lots of people, but like objectively, it's kind of like not that harmful if we're comparing it morally to like quote unquote like non-con, like the idea of like, oh, just viewing this makes you condone it. I mean, someone consensually eating poop is like a little gross to me, but technically it's consensual. It's like the same thing with like blood, for example. Like I know blood, menstrual blood, or anything related to blood is usually a banned term. And like, I mean, most games that are T for teen and up have blood somewhere. Like if there's any form of action
Any
or violence,
yeah.
or I don't know if a vampire exists, they're gonna have to talk about drinking blood. And again, like the menstruation one is pretty ridiculous. I've been aware of this one because as a sex worker, you're really not allowed to mention, like if you're on your period, you cannot reveal that, especially on campsites. It's even like you can get, taken down for having a visible tampon string because of the implication that you are bleeding right now. So a lot of cam girls and sex workers have to talk about ways around that, because if you imagine you're a full-time cam girl, if you have essentially, possibly 5 to 7 days per week or per month where you cannot work, that is crazy, and that can really fuck you up. And again, it's a completely natural process. Menstruation does not involve pain. It does not involve non-consent, and there's nothing inherently ethically or morally wrong with it. But, Discover or Visa or whoever else thinks it's kind of icky, so you're not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah. Also, specifically, the CEOs of Visa Japan and Mastercard, who are like currently taking a lot of fire for this particular action, are both white dudes. So saying menstruation is an icky thing from two white dudes and therefore you shouldn't talk about it is just the most hilariously cringe thing to me. But I do want to circle back for a second, because scat as a term, right, is that it comes from ecological study of animals, and their droppings is a really important way of identification or learning about them. So what if you're doing a thing that's entirely non-sexual, is entirely about ecological study of animals in a jungle or whatever, and you use the correct term for such a thing, and now you're banned? And like the same thing goes for a bunch of other stuff where these terms can be used out of context. Like I said, furry, where we had a rug that was described as furry. Nope, I've had to go and adjust that. But also just like a lot of furries in general, there's a lot of terms in particular trying to, target them. So I'm surprised we haven't seen a massive furry counterattack. I haven't heard anything from the furry community about this kind of stuff, especially when their content is under fire. Whereas it doesn't take that long to call back to recent memory of people talking about how, because the running joke of how furries are holding up the entire IT industry on their own, then a lot of them actually being hackers and like white hat hackers and all this kind of shit. How has Mastercard and Visa not had massive service disruptions because they're coming for furry porn? That seems like a very short road for me to come to conclusion, and yet these things haven't happened. So look, if you're a furry, I want to hear why you haven't gone. I'm trying really hard not to mention a certain person. Why you haven't done anything about what Visa and Mastercard are doing. Because look, it's dire. It's dire for all of us, and I don't see it getting better, and I see it getting harder every day. And I don't want to sit here and be like, I'm fighting the good fight. I'm doing the best I can. The whole goal of THM was always to put out trans-positive messages and allow people to explore gender in funny and weird and different ways. And we're moving in a more broader direction these days, where we have Marcy writing the most unhinged nonsense in the funniest way possible for the Grand Butt Sex Hotel, and the list of banned words come out, and we're like, well, Cass, the latest character we just revealed, who is a huge misandrist, that's like the whole point, is that you have to choose to look after this person. You have to voluntarily suffer through all of this to fulfill your job, because it reflects better on you. And all of a sudden, it's going to be really hard for us to do any of the actual content that we had planned because it's torture adjacent. Even if it's consensual, it doesn't matter. It's torture adjacent. And that makes it really hard for us to figure out how we are going to be doing this kind of stuff. Or like the creature of Casterfield. It's supposed to be a monster or a demon or something. And then if we can't do anything that's remotely non-human because of the list of terms is so broad and vague, that kind of takes the wind out of our sails on that one. What are we supposed to do? So it is kind of, I don't know, it's stressful, honestly. It's hard to be sitting here working, I don't know, fucking 30, 40 hours a week on this thing. I barely get paid, if ever, trying to make this all come together, and then be told that we've lost about 40% of our monthly income to try and keep it going at the same speed that we're going, to try and continue to grow, continue to do stuff like the Collectible Cards project, where we invest in people to do commissions. So it's not just recycling our own art into this thing. You actually get to see new and cool stuff. We actually get to spotlight other artists that we like, showing off our characters in an exciting way. And watching it become harder every day, it becomes more difficult to say, yes, I want to do this thing. And that's kind of their goal. The more pressure they put on it, the more harder it is for us to be able to do it, because we live in this horrible capitalist society. Everything is dictated by the ability to get money. If I can't earn money and feed myself, I must then make choices that allow me to do those things. And that's their ultimate goal. They're not going to rest until we are all crushed under the boot, unfortunately.
And yeah, and well, not to be all doomer, but there really is hope, I do think. We have companies like GOG.com who are trying to do something. We're seeing some publishers like, I know, like Jast and Manga Gamer that are trying to be able to host games in the meantime, or platforms like Subscribestar that are offering a little place for people to land while they figure out what to do. So again, I really do want to emphasize supporting small creators right now. If you have a favorite artist or a favorite game dev, like, they are at risk of potentially not being able to make their games anymore. If you've never given a single cent to a game you really like, now's the time to subscribe to their Patreon. I think they've probably earned at least $5, if not more, from you. I mean, that's as much as a single coffee that you get once a month, and you're getting an entire game and maybe a bunch of free demos that you had previously downloaded for that. So please support content creators. If you are in some of the countries where these kinds of headquarters are located, so places like Visa, Mastercard, PayPal, call them. I really emphasize, like, give them a call once or twice a day. I know phone calls are scary, but again, you're just talking to a customer service rep. But don't be mean to them. Just ask questions. Ultimately, we're trying to waste time. How these call centers work is it costs money every time you call, and it costs more money when you keep them on the phone for as long as possible, or essentially waste their time because you're asking a question they can't answer. And what that does is it affects Visa's bottom line. It affects Mastercard's bottom line. They have to pay more for their call centers. You are making their times worse. And that is actually really important to do right now. Sending emails is pretty unadvisable. While it is a cool thing you can do, sending emails pretty much does nothing. They are just going to get thrown in the trash, or at best, you might get an AI-generated response. If you go on basically any of the NSFW gaming subreddits, they have lists of various places you can call, and they even have pre-made scripts of what to say when they pick up the phone. So again, if you are someone who you have a lot of anxiety about talking to the phone, you can read off a script. You can just ask, hey, I would like some clarification about Visa's policies around adult content. Can you answer these questions for me? And, just be polite with them, keep on calling, keep engaging. In cases where you can actually protest, I mean, it's very hard for most people to stop using MasterCard or Visa. But, with like these specific websites, like, I'm definitely not buying from Itch.io anymore, at least unless they completely overturn their policy. Talking about these kinds of issues, again, like, do some grassroots work. Talk about it with your friends, talk about it with other gamers, talk about it with artists, fanfic writers, book readers, movie watchers, anybody who consumes content on the internet, and just kind of try to explain to them that it's okay if they personally think hentai is cringe, but they have a sexual interest, I guarantee you, and that sexual interest is also going to be threatened, whether it's IRL porn, cam girls, modeling sites, erotica, fan fiction, fan art, slash whatever it is, you're going to be next. Even when we talk about like the furry community, I fully anticipate eventually Bad Dragon is next.
Yep.
For selling, quote unquote bestiality is the excuse I think they will give. We've already seen Etsy has taken down most NSFW content. A lot of the dildo sellers had to move off site. And I would fully expect that next up, they're going to just tell Bad Dragon they're not allowed to sell that anymore. And that's going to be pretty major. I think that would probably push a lot of people into action. So again, there's a precedent set. Show them these precedents and let them know that, hey, this is going to impact the thing you like next.
Yeah, and I've been seeing a lot of creators that I like have been reposting and talking about these kind of things. There's a lot of big graphics that have been made that are really helpful, talking about what the numbers are, what number is best for you in particular to call by your region or by, what state you're in and stuff like that. And another thing specifically, if you're an Australian resident, you can take action against Collective Shout. This was another one that I saw, which was like, if you're not an Australian resident, it's not actually helpful, but if you are an Australian resident, you can appeal for Collective Shout's charity status. And the more appeals they get, if they lose their charity status, it will drastically impact their ability to meddle with other people. And I had a look into it because I saw this. And I was like, I'm an Australian. This is a thing that I can do very easily. It's on a .gov website. It basically shows you all of their business details. Like if you look up somebody's ABN, it gives you a bunch of details about the business. This is the same kind of thing. The charity lookup lets you have a look and you get to see, like who's the guy in charge. You get to see a lot of the different dealings. But again, it's listed as a charity. And the things that they are doing are uncharitable. And the things that they are doing kind of, they have a short guideline of what the things are that you need to not complete, but like boxes you have to check in order to be considered a charity in this country. And we firmly believe that they are in breach of these guidelines, and therefore their charity status should be revoked. And this will only happen if people complain and talk about firsthand, like why they are doing these things. They should not be lobbying governments. This is a lobbying company. Their whole point is that they are trying to get laws put in place, and they're pressuring, companies and countries to add censorship to things, which is not what a charity does. Charities help people, help at-risk people. This is not what they are doing. They are taking money away from LGBT people. They are directly impacting the lives of already at-risk people, and therefore you need to use your voice. You need to use your phone. You need to reach out and talk to the people that are in charge, and your voice will actually make a difference. And that's why we are using our voice to tell you that your voice is important, because there's billions of us. There's like 8 billionaires, right? And currently we're getting ratioed like you wouldn't fucking believe, but they can't ignore every single one of us. They want to keep making money, and so they have to eventually bow down to the pressure of the people if they want to continue operating. Now, this has been a very sad episode, so Neko, you're going to give us a really happy outro. The happiest. Bell ringing, cartwheels, you name it. Let's go.
Well, remember what I said about supporting your favorite creators? Well, I'm pretty sure Spooky and I are definitely one of your favorite creators. And you know how you can support us for free? You can subscribe to our channel and you can give the video a like. You can share this with your friends. Let us explain to them what's happening. Put something in the comments. What are you doing to fight against these evil corporations? Are you a dev who got affected? Tell us about it in the comments. We'd love to have you on the show. Click the bell because our kind of content is always always getting, basically blacklisted on YouTube anyways. So the only way we're really able to get attention is by people talking about it and by people sharing it. And, hopefully we'll get some updates in the future that are a little bit more positive. But if not, we are still going to be here as long as we're able to be talking about these sorts of issues. So stay tuned. Hopefully next video will be a little bit more pleasant. But regardless, we will see you next time on the Sexy Business Podcast. Bye, everyone.